Climify is independent of climate designers. The views expressed on Climify are solely those of the host, Eric Benson, and guests of each episode, and do not represent the views of the climate designers. Let's be real. The status quo has created a lot of the world's problems, and we can't rely on business as usual to get us out of this mess we're in. That's why we're partnering with Think NATO this season. It's a dead simple 4-step process to blow open conventional thinking and get to truly unique and innovative ideas. It's not about finding the perfect answer. It's about starting with the right questions, pushing the edges, and then taking action. You can learn more about Think NATO at thinknato.com. That's THINKNADO.com. Think NATO, the positive action engine. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 5 of Climify. I'm going to be quite honest here. I wasn't sure I was going to do another season of this show. Putting together a show like this it's a labor of love, an emphasis truly on the labor portion of that phrase. It's hours and hours, editing, finding guests, researching, promoting, and the list goes on. But I do the show because I believe in the cause. We have to continue to act when it comes to climate change. We have to educate one another to create what we want the future to be. But I was tired and I felt defeated. And then the US elections happened last November. And it took me about a month to truly digest the results. And during that time, I was, like many of you, trying to find the bright side. I'm definitely not an eternal optimist by any means, but I saw a few glimmers of good shit happening here and there, but not enough. So it was clear to me at that point I had to focus on optimism this season. Optimism is truly important now when forces in power want you to feel only overwhelmed, defeated, and in despair. The guests this season will help educate and empower you to continue the climate fight and provide useful actions you can take to create the world that you want to live in. It's not going to be easy, but I hope the 6 guests this season help form that community of support you need through their voice and words. And Climify is here for you too. Let's pick ourselves up and get back to our work. We have 6 amazing women on this season 5 who are true leaders when it comes to climate action. And most importantly, they offer a lot of hope. March was Women's History Month here in the US. And I know it's no longer March, but why only celebrate women's strength for 1 month? In this first episode of season 5, we're celebrating Earth Week with the amazing Anne Therese Gennari. I have been following Anne on LinkedIn for years now, and I find her climate optimism newsletter as a real comfort in the current storm. But who's Anne? Anne's a lot of things. Anne's amazing. Anne's a TEDx speaker. She's an educator. She's an author of the Climate Optimist Handbook. Go get it right now. She also is a workshop host and communicator. She focuses on shifting the narrative on climate change so that we can act from courage and excitement and not fear. I find that truly important. She's been doing this for over a decade, promoting climate optimism to help people cope with what's going on and make decisions to create the climate just future she believes awaits all of us. She has brought her message to schools, companies, and organizations, some of which include Harvard, Columbia University, BMW, Tetra Pak, and the United Nations Global Compact. So I truly hope you enjoy this conversation with Anne Therese Gennari. Welcome to Climify. It's amazing to have you here. And you do so much work that I and Bhavna have had a really tough time with absorbing it all. Just before this interview, I did your Imagine guided meditation so I can feel focused, and I feel much lighter after that. And I have to say, you have a golden voice. It was so soothing.
Wow. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. I was just taking in what you just told me with a smile. That makes me feel so honored. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was a wonderful meditation. You, like I said, do a lot of work. You're the author of the Climate Optimist Handbook. You're the founder of the Climate Optimist. You are, which I listen to, co-host of Hey Change podcast with your co-host Robin Shaw. You teach, and like I said, you're the owner of a golden voice. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm very interested in getting started about your work because I find it very uplifting, and it also I think resonates with me because I'm very practical in my climate action, and I feel like you are too. And I'm hoping that you can share with us just how you ended up in this particular path of optimism regarding climate change.
It's such a great question. And there's a very long answer to it, and there's a shorter version, which I'll guess I'll get into. And I honestly had a spiritual awakening, which,
Mm.
just created this turning point in my activism. I learned about climate change in my teens, watching An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, and thought that the world was going to come to a stop and every leader around the world was going to sit down around this big table and figure out this thing called climate change, being naive and whatnot as a teenager, or not naive, just thinking that would be the most radical thing to do when you're, facing your own extinction. That didn't happen, as we all know.
Thank
And
goodness.
right. So I guess I felt like I had very little power to change anything about this thing called climate change. And so I figured I just focus on being a teenager and, do good in school and
Yeah.
do my part-time job and just, continue my career path as I should as a teenager, and wasn't paying attention to what was happening on the inside, which was this growing anxiety around the state of the world and the, seemingly lack of action from political leaders. And as I reached my 20s, I was a full-blown what I call angry activist, meaning
Mm.
I really wanted to see change and was forcefully trying to push this change in the people around me, my closest, friends and family, and trying to quote unquote educate them on the right way and how we all had to wake up and realize that how we were living life wasn't, correct, and we had to change and do better. And it's a very great way of losing friends and
Yeah, I was gonna say, how
distancing
did that
yourself
go
from your
for you?
loved ones.
Yeah, how did that go?
And at the same time, I wasn't very happy with myself. I felt very and displaced in my own privilege, growing up in a country like Sweden and having things laid out for me and knowing that so many, both people and other animals around the world just weren't so fortunate. And I
Yeah.
had a hard time accepting that. And I was in pretty sincere climate anxiety in my early 20s.
Mm.
Had no idea what that was because at this, it was just like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
No one was talking about it. There was no such term. And I was saved, I say saved by this moment after a dinner conversation with my brother, which I had again lost and feeling like no one else cared about the environment but me.
Mhm.
And I fell to the floor in my parents' guest room and
Oh
just
my gosh.
cried, like literally just emptied myself in tears for a solid 15 minutes. And afterwards, I felt this incredible lightness that I hadn't felt in so long. And I closed my eyes and wanted to not go anywhere. I wanted to just
Oh,
exist in this lightness that I hadn't, experienced in a while. And this message came through and it said, "You're here to be a climate optimist." And I
yeah.
never heard that term before. I had no idea what that meant, but I realized there was a different way of going about this work. And I became extremely determined to figure out what that path looked like. So I guess that was my entry point to optimism. And then it took me another 10 years or so to figure out what it actually means to be an optimist, which is what I now teach others. But yeah, I'm grateful for that turning point because I would have not ended up in a good place if I didn't have it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some parallel between my life and yours. I don't know if you saw The Inconvenient Truth in the movie theater. I went to the movie theater like hours early thinking there was gonna be a big line, and there was like 5 people.
Mm.
And I was devastated because I myself, like you, was feeling that grief and concern and anxiety. And I was trying to find that community in the movie theater, and it was just my friends and I. So it was a little bit disappointing, and later, I think that year is when I had a little bit of a not a breakdown, but very, very tough moments of depression about it, and so I really appreciate those like you who have realized, like, there's only really one path forward, and that is to fight and be optimistic about it.
I love that, and I think something that comes to me is that we have to allow for that breakdown. I think people are so scared of it, the heavy feelings that come with realizing, the truth of the climate crisis and also what that means for all of us is scary, and we don't wanna go there, we don't wanna feel those feelings, but for me, that's the first step, is, like, just allowing yourself to come to that breakdown because then we can start to rebuild ourselves in a whole different way. I'm sure you wanna get into that more later, but I wanted to just pick that up before I forgot about it, that why are we so afraid of that breakdown?
Well, actually, let's stay there for a second because we're gonna get into a lot more optimism throughout our season, and one question I wanna ask everyone is, we've all had that climate grief, or we're maybe one day going to, but what is a really healthy relationship, in your opinion, with climate grief?
I think the word is healthy, and many people, I think, misunderstand optimism as this toxic positivity and wishful
Yeah,
thinking, and, there's no room for feeling grief and regret and anger, and I think it encompasses all of those feelings. To be a grounded optimist, you have to really allow yourself to sit with every emotion, no matter what that looks like, and the only way to be grounded and grow that emotional resilience that will allow us to keep on, because things will continue to be tough. I hate to
yeah,
say it, we're not gonna fix this tomorrow, and even if we were to stop producing all fossil fuels tomorrow, there is still a backlog of emissions that we have to live through, and so it will be tough for a while. And I think we need to really start by accepting the grief and accepting that some things will never go back to the same. There are things that have been lost that will not be able to save, like there's some things that we have to just accept that it's in the past. And that's heartbreaking. But I think there's something so beautiful in accepting that heartbreak. If you don't mind, I wanted to share this passage from, it's not my own quote, but I mentioned it in my book, and it's by Paris von Storkness. He goes, "There's a hidden secret in the despair paradox. Going down the depths of despair can also bring healing. The more we let death, even the threats of extinction, into our souls, the more we can appreciate the current vibrant vitality of life in its many forms, and we may even be transformed by it." And I think that for the last part, like, we may even be transformed by it, and I think it's a transformation itself that we need to not fear. And a healthy relationship to grief for me is creating space within us to have that acceptance that, as nature around us dies, a part of us dies too, because we're all
yeah,
connected. And it's impossible not to feel that. And the more we try to avoid it, we're just going through this spiritual bypassing and, tending to toxic positivity and trying to, assume everything is great and everything is going to be fine. And I think a big piece of climate optimism is accepting that some things will never be the same.
yeah.
That doesn't mean that we can't also find new ways that are even better, but we have to let go and accept the past that is behind us. And so, yeah, there's definitely room for grief even in climate optimism.
Yeah, I wonder then, on your point of view, about something I've heard quite often, and that is, about grief and the anxiety, that it's viewed as bad, and we should just be, I guess, I don't know what, but I feel like it's wrong not to feel the way that you feel about it.
There's another quote by Joanna Macy. It goes, "It's okay for a heart to be broken over the world. What else is a heart for?"
Mm,
Or something like that. And I think that's also so beautiful. And again, I something that came to me in my early days as a climate optimist is awareness hurts and that's okay. Meaning it is okay to be aware,
yeah,
because when we try not to be aware of the hard things, we also close ourselves up to the good things. And being fully aware and present in the moment means that we do start to pay more attention to things that aren't working, and ultimately, that can be painful because, we don't always want to face the truth, but it's also in facing the truth and allowing ourselves to be angry about something. That's how we can activate change. We can't just become complacent
right.
in what's going on or say, well, we have figured things out in the past. I'm sure we'll do it again. It's like, yeah, but, looking historically, we did figure things out because people got angry, right? Like there
Yeah,
has to be a face of it that is uncomfortable. And I think especially maybe my generation, we haven't really lived through sincere wartime or, anything too difficult. And it's been a little bit cushy, and we haven't learned what it looks like or what it is to hold space for those feelings. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about it, but I think ultimately there are, like you said, no good or bad feelings. And even as a mom, I'm really learning, like, accepting motherhood for what that is. Like, there are
Yeah.
some days that are just shitty. You're like, I do not want to be
Yeah.
home with my kids today, and I do not want to deal with another poop explosions, or I'm so tired of not sleeping at night. And I think just accepting that for me has been healing in itself. Like, it's okay to not be the happiest I've ever been today, because it's part of it. And so I'm learning a lot about motherhood that I then can apply to my activism as well.
That moment when you started to bawl in your, was it your brother's room or
My
at your
parents'
house?
guest room,
Your
yeah.
parent, yeah. Do you feel like that was the moment afterwards that you gained acceptance of the situation and the loss to move on towards where you are now?
I think so. I think, this is a little bit woo-woo-ish, but something was downloaded within me there, where like there was some sort of insight where, like, the right path forward, and this isn't sustainable. Like, the way you're trying to approach change and like this forceful way of shaming yourself and others is just not going to work. That, I think, was when I realized we're not at fault here. It's not our fault. Like, we're not the villain to blame. We were born into a world that is dysfunctional, and it's our mission to help, recreate that world and reshape it. But we need to start by, taking that blame off our shoulders, because if we're carrying that load and at the same time trying to build something new, it's extremely hard to move
Yeah.
forward. And so I think just starting fresh and saying, like, let's heal our broken hearts. And that starts with healing ourselves. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, like I said, it took me 10 years to figure out what it actually means to be a climate optimist. And I did tend to this sort of toxic positivity at first. I was trying to only focus on the positive news and stay up to date with the good news out there and be optimistic. And ultimately, my climate anxiety grew through the roof during those early days. So, I went some back roads realizing that this is not the way. And it took a while to realize that for me to sustain this work, I need to start with myself. I need to heal myself. I need to give myself the space to be my ultimate, most optimistic, most and inspired and empowered and grounded self, and bring that person to the table. And that means that some days I need to take a break, because you can't stay committed all the time. And so I think when people realize that we are the change and a better world is possible because we make it so, then you can bring the focus back to yourself and realize that, wow, I am really important here and my health is important, and I need to tend to those parts of myself that ultimately can create the change that we want to see.
Well, you just mentioned the phrase, I should say, toxic optimism. And when we first met a couple weeks ago, you also spoke about conditional optimism, complacent optimism. You have a lot of optimisms, and I'm wondering if you could help define all those terms.
Well, first of all, I'm very nerdy about optimism. I can speak on the neuroscience of it for hours, but it was economist Paul Romer who came up with it. And conditional versus complacent optimism, or you can say passive versus active optimism, is very different. So let's say complacent optimism is, he explains it as a child on his birthday waiting for presents, right? Like, you're so excited and my family's coming over and they will give me gifts and I can't wait to see what those hold. And that's optimism in itself, but he's reliant on other people bringing him gifts to make him happy. Or there is a conditional optimism where, the child is excited to build a tree house, and he has this vision of like this amazing tree house he wants to build. And so he gathers some friends and, say, hey, let's build a tree house together. And we have to like find some woods and we have to learn how to do this. And then that's active optimism that people get to participate in. And it's also excitement, but they are in control of the outcome in a whole different way. And it's also deeper, has more meaning, and it's more active in a sense. And I think when we think about our climate optimism or activism, it's not about, can we figure this out? Please, scientist, please, engineer, please, whoever genius, tell me that we can find a solution and that we're safe for tomorrow. It's more in recognizing that optimism isn't an attitude or even a mindset. It's a practice. It's something we can show up for.
Um,
And when you start to understand the sort of neuroscience behind optimism, what happens in our brains when we think positively, we actually prime and wire ourselves for success in a whole different way. And we're much better problem solvers. We're much more creative thinkers. We like to collaborate more, and we take care of ourselves better too. And so again, who we bring to the table is much stronger and more capable of creating change. And so for me, it's helping people understand that optimism is a practice, and it's a conditional optimism that will continue, that will let us continue show up for the work that we care about so much.
I think you just titled the episode with that, in that optimism is a practice.
Yeah, it's that simple.
Yeah, there is a part you write a lot on your blog, and I try to keep up with you on LinkedIn, and it feels like you're doing something every day from a blog standpoint, which I appreciate actually, because it's usually very, very helpful when I've read them. And there's a piece that you wrote about rethinking productivity. I think it was on your blog about this idea of productivity, and I'm wondering, what would you say are some key things to keep in mind at a time like right now when there's just like an overwhelming amount of things going on and things to get done?
Well, I will preface this answer with something that you made me think of when you said that. I do not post every day. In fact, I've committed myself to posting weekly on my Substack and on LinkedIn. And now I was supposed to post earlier today, but I mentioned before our conversation started that I had my worst night's sleep ever. And so I've given myself the grace of being late this
Yeah.
week. And I think what I keep reminding myself is that, no one's keeping score of like, well, you're supposed to post every Wednesday. Like, where's your newsletter this week, right? Like, we believe that everyone is keeping track of what we're doing and we get so stressed over it. My husband always says, did you create this timeline or did someone else tell you?
Right.
Can you give yourself a break? And I'm like, I guess I can give myself another day. And I'm saying that now because as I don't like the word climate activists, but anyone who's wanting to participate in building a better world, we feel so urgent in this important work, which it is urgent. We have to act now. We have to create change fast. But I love this term. We have to slow down to speed up, which is what the blog post was about. What does productivity look like and what lies have we been told about productivity? And let's just start with multitasking. We believe that we can do things smarter. We can outsmart things because we have such access to information. We can do things quicker. We can do many things at the same time. Well, for one, there is no such thing as multitasking because your brain is just switching back and forth between tasks. And when you do so, you create errors, you make mistakes, and you have to
Yes.
course correct and correct those errors. And you get frustrated because you're wasting time correcting errors. And at the same time, you don't have the depth of focus that you actually need to be your fullest, most productive self. And so I guess the next step is that your stress actually blocks both creative thinking, but also problem solving skills. And because, for many, we can talk about that, but for many different reasons, when we stress, we activate the amygdala, which, signals like the freeze, what is it called? The flee, freeze, or fawn response for like,
Yes.
we get
Yeah.
all like primal and say we have to like escape now or save ourselves. And when we do, it's very hard for the brain to think strategically or creatively and come up with new ideas. But then also something we don't talk about too often, which is mentioned in Johan Hari's book, Still in Focus, which I think anyone should read this book if you haven't already. He talks about mind wandering and how important that is and how we tend to say like daydreamers, like we don't want to be daydreamers. Like, don't like, don't, what do you say? Like, don't escape reality, like come back to reality. Like we're focusing here. But then actually, studies have shown that it's in the mind wandering, it's in the in-between space where the brain makes sense of the world and the information that you consumed earlier. And so it's almost like reading between the lines. So let's say you're reading a book and you really focus, you have like the spotlight focus on whatever the page is telling you. Subconsciously, your mind is also kind of spacing off and thinking, okay, the information I'm now reading, how does that relate to the chapter I just read? How does that relate to my own life? Okay, he's sharing a story about his personal life, but I can probably think of a story in my own life that I could relate this to. And so you're doing this in between the lines reading if you have the focus to allow for that. But if you're reading an article at, maximum speed as you're also trying to make coffee and make breakfast for your kid, and then like, oh, I'm multitasking, I'm consuming this, news article while I'm doing all these other things at the same time, the mind wandering isn't there. And it's in the mind wandering that we can make sense of what we're learning and then maybe think beyond that, not just taking it at face value, saying, oh, he told me in this article, this is the truth. And so there's no reflective thinking. And, the creative thinking that ultimately allows for new ideas to take form is lost. And so I think when I say we have to slow down to speed up, it's so that we can actually become intentional with what we're trying to do here, which ultimately is trying, building something different. We have to reimagine world as we know it. And we can't do that by just consuming information and not giving it the depthness or the depth that it requires for us to then take that information and think bigger. And so productivity in my mind is being very clear on what is my intention here? What do I want to have from this exchange, from this piece of information? What do I want to accomplish this week? And then when you set that intention, you can be very smart about the time you're spending. So you're not doing less. You're just cutting the fat to get to the meat. And I hate to say that as a vegetarian, but like you're trying to
Me
be
too. I'm a
very
vegetarian.
focused on what is it actually that we're trying to get done and how can I, shed all the nonsense to get to that core. So yeah, and again, I've actually had a lot of people reach out to me and say thank you for that piece because I've been feeling so rushed in my work and I have to be everywhere and do everything at once. And another great reminder that my tea bag told me the other day is, nature accomplishes everything. Nature doesn't rush, yet everything is accomplished.
Yeah, that's a
And,
good one.
so again, we're nature. We have to slow down. Our brains and our bodies are not created to keep up with the speed at which the world is operating on right now. And so why don't to become fully human, we have to start by slowing down, or else we're losing all the qualities of humanness. And we can leave the speed for computers to do on our
That's
behalf so
true.
that we can be
That's where we
ultimately
can use
human.
AI. Just let them
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I laughed a few minutes ago because you just described me in some days. But what you said is super helpful because I find myself reading because I like to read, but I will read a couple of pages and then I will say, "What did I just read?" Because I was thinking about the something else that's coming up after I'm done reading, or maybe I'm just reading to say that I read it. And so today in particular, it's a very busy day, and I knew I had to talk with you, and I knew I had to be present, and I knew I wanted to do my best job. And so right when I started the day, I told myself to slow down
Mm.
and not think about, "Hey, I'm gonna be interviewing Anne in, like, 6 hours from now, so let's just take things as they come and not be my head spins all the time," there's so many things. So, really appreciate your words there. I felt like it was a little bit, I this is a little bit of a therapy session for me, so that it's
I'll charge
productive.
you later.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause, yeah, you should.
No.
Well, I wanted to go into some of the other amazing stuff that you'd have in your book around inner development goals. Speaking of therapy, in the last few years, there's been a lot of importance, has been given to inner development goals in combination with the sustainable development goals. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that is and how can we tap into these inner development goals in our own daily life?
Yeah, and amazing question. And I didn't know about the inner development goals at first. They were introduced to me by someone who was like, "Have you heard about them?" And I had to obviously check them out
Yeah.
and was thrilled to see that so much of the things I've been talking on and teaching for so long now, it's super aligned with these inner development goals. And ultimately, they're like a side to the sustainability goals. But if I were to say something, in my opinion, we cannot achieve the SDGs without the IDGs, meaning for us to actually create the changes that we want to see in the world around us, which is, mapped out in the sustainability goals, we have to show up in that leadership that will allow for that to happen. I think we tend to overlook that we're going through tremendous amounts of changes right now. And some of them are inevitable and some of them we want to activate faster.
Well,
But change is not always easy for us. And it takes a lot of, again, emotional resilience. It takes a lot of inner work for us to keep showing up for that. And so I love that this framework has been created. And I'll just share the 5 different goals are one is being, so relationship to ourselves. Like, what does that look like? How do we strengthen that? The second one is thinking. So the cognitive skills around, like, again, what we talked about, like, how do we think in a different way? How do we reimagine the world as we know it? And then the third one is relating. So caring for others and for the world. And how does it mean to think, multidimensional in a way, but like not just our family and our community, but like everyone else in the world and the future world, right? Like there are people after us, hopefully, and how can we relate better to them? The fourth one is collaborating. So how do we strengthen the collaboration skills? And then the last one is acting. How do we enable change? And I think these are these are pillars that we, without them, I think if we don't work on our inner development goals, there's just not going to be successful sustainability goals. And I'm so grateful that they now exist, and there you can access them for free online. You can start talking on behalf of them if you want to. But yeah, I think the sooner we realize that radical change starts from within, and I mentioned this earlier, but we can create a better world if we choose to, right? Like the change is within us, and that can be both scary and so empowering at the same time. But it comes with activating and choosing to tend to this inner leadership. And sometimes that means slowing down and recognizing our limits and setting the boundaries necessary for us to keep showing up. It does mean that sometimes we have to scale up to do bigger. But yeah, I love the goals, and I think anyone should go Google them right now if you don't know about them, because they're essentially the most important thing we have to talk about at the moment.
We'll help everyone out by putting them in the show notes so they can easily click on them. Gosh, there were so many things going through my head when you were describing that, but what I took away from it, and tell me if I'm off path here, was that there's a lot of work that we can do on ourselves that will make us stronger and more resilient and more optimistic to do more on climate action. Because I think if we're just mired in the apathy or despair or just the daily grind, it's just not going to happen.
Uh, Couldn't agree more. And I think
Yes, I
I think that
understood it.
yes, and I'm trying to like see what's coming through to me, but I find that people have a hard time with the action itself and seeing the bigger picture, because the threat is so slow moving and slow approaching, right? Like it's not where, oh, there's a storm coming tomorrow, or right now there's a war that we have to tend to. Like it is coming closer and closer. I like to picture or paint the image of climate change as this storm approaching on the horizon. We can see it building, but we don't know when is it going to hit, how long is it going to last, how bad will it be? Like it's still so much uncertainty involved in it. And we're not really used to respond to uncertainty in a radical way. In fact, we become very conservative in our approaches where, okay, since we don't know what this threat brings, let's retreat back and hold on tight. Let's crawl back into our caves and wait the storm out. And so we're seeing a lot of people do that right now. And in this, and then the apathy builds up of like, well, I can't do anything anyways. Like I know it's bad, but what can I do? And I was attending a local grassroots, organizing call recently to talk about my book. And this one woman is like, I really want to be part of, you know, co-creating this new world. I can see it, I can feel it, but like I want to be actively participating in doing that work. Does anyone know of any organizations that are doing that? And it was just this very like cricket moment where people are like, just I don't think they didn't really quite know how to respond to that. And then finally the leader was like, well, I like to believe that that's what we're doing, you know? And but, like, that's why we organize, that's why we have these calls,
Yeah.
that's why we, meet up locally to take action. But because there isn't, like, a rule book of, like, do these things and a new world will be created, it's happening all over, all the time. And the more we can recognize that I cannot change the world, but I can change my world. I can show up differently in, my daily actions. I can show up differently for myself. I can show up with a different attitude towards my family. I can participate and show up for the work that my community is organizing. And I can matter here. And sure, I don't know if that's going to multiply enough and create the changes fast enough that we need to see, but that needs to happen. We need people to show up in their small little worlds. And if everyone starts doing that, it will ripple effect like rings in the water. But if we so focused on like, well, what is happening on Capitol Hill? What's happening, at the big tables? And then we get so taken aback and feel so powerless because we don't have agency over that change. That's how we fall into apathy and complacency and ultimately feel so overwhelmed and anxious driven. And so I think, again, it's hard because the threat is slow approaching and our actions are also seemingly so small, but they matter. And I
Yeah.
think the more we can shift that narrative, we can step into our own power.
I wonder if that woman's question relates to something you said earlier about comfort and even convenience, that she was possibly looking for an easy answer to all of this, just like you would find in, hey, I'm hungry. Here's a microwave dinner. I'll put it in. Problem solved. Uh, yeah, it just made me curious. Like, maybe that's part of our problem, is that we are looking for these really simple, easy, convenient solutions when it actually is a little harder than that.
If 100%, and I think part of it why the inner development goals comes into play and why, tending to ourselves and our own inner leadership is so important is because we do have to really grapple with those questions of, what is I don't even know, like, what is everything? Like, what is convenience? What is right? What am I supposed to do? I put out this challenge for this month where I'm inviting people to listen to the meditation that you listen to and then submit an answer to what came through. And then there are these amazing prizes that, brands and authors have donated to this gift raffle. And all you have to do is like sit down, meditate, take a moment, dream. You can win awesome prizes. And there's no, cost to it at all. And I've had such a hard time getting people to participate because they're used to like, show me a 30-second reel.
Right.
Like, show me something. Oh, you mean I have to
Exactly.
like now sit down somewhere and dedicate 20 minutes? Like, people just don't know how to do that. And I think it's hard because, what I'm trying to teach and help people realize is that we need to go there. We need to step out of the hamster wheel. Sure, you can learn information on Instagram. You can read an article and, pick up some new information, but we can only go so far with the existing information. I want to know what is deeply hidden within you. What are you holding on to that you're not paying attention to, and how can that serve the world? And for you to even like access that part of yourself, you had to take a break and step outside. You have to go explore something different. And I'm trying to pull that out of people, and it's so hard because we're so stuck in this like, "But give me the answer. What can I do
Exactly.
in a minute that like can help me, whatever." So yeah, I think there's a lot to that. And I think people, we see how fast the quote unquote bad changes happen. Like we have Trump in office. It's like, okay, now I'm going to sign this piece of paper and boom, we're out of the Paris Agreement. So like, whoa, like how do we counter that? Like,
Yeah.
give me like, what is as big of a, decision that I can now sign up for? So it's hard. And I think we have to start by rewiring ourselves and again, creating that space where, you know, we allow for the bigger answers to come through that we can't see yet. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, you teach, so you might also see this with the students in that, I need to learn something. I need to don't have a lot of time or whatever it is, they're busy. And so I think they're used to having it in this 20-second window. Like, yeah, you can learn this software in 20 seconds. You can. And I also feel like as also an educator that what you said about the solution, they want the solution and then their take on it. Give
Yeah.
us what we need to do and we'll do it. Where a lot of this is, hey, it's deeper than that. There's a lot of critical thinking that needs to happen and time. And so I think that's actually working against us right now, unfortunately.
Well, also the world we created. I talked to my own mother about this. I now have a 2.5-year-old and a little baby, but I we need to let kids be bored, right? Like today, because of all the shows and I'm trying really hard to eliminate screen time. Granted, it was a really tough winter, so she does get it sometimes. But, we grew up just having to figure things out, right? And so there all these studies now showing that because there is a lack of boredom, we don't know how to think creatively, and we want to have the answer right away. And we have to be said no to, like a child needs to hear no, and they need to just sit and be frustrated and bored because that's ultimately how we tap into our higher potential. And I think even as adults now, we talked about like, okay, I'm reading an article and then I have to even ask myself, what did I just read? And I think it's so easy to get stuck there, and I get there too. And we can practice this. We have to remember that our focus has been hijacked and it's intentional by these media companies that, they're even like researching like what is the color blue that could most hijack your focus and like
Yes.
steal you from whatever you're doing and go here instead. Like we're living in a world that's ultimately designed to hijack us at all times. And we can fight against that by reintegrating some of that childhood, you know, play and boredom of like, okay, I'm waiting for the bus. It's not going to be here in 10 minutes. I don't have to look at my phone. What if I just stand here and look at the trees? Sure, it's not going to change. It may be boring, but since it's not changing, maybe I'll let myself daydream or mind wander a little bit. And what's going to come through to me then? I think creating and integrating these moments of slow time or boredom or just nothingness is how we tap back into our own potential. That's how we slow ourselves down. And I think we're going to learn that there is more time in our days than we think there is. because we're wasting it in places that don't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can practice it, and I think it's pretty crucial right now that we tap back into what we used to do when we were younger, which is play.
Exactly. I mean, I think I admitted last season almost my age. I'm a Gen X, and I grew up, maybe I'm a little older than you, and I grew up with my parents kicking me out into the backyard or just go outside. And uh, I just remember days, especially in the summer, I felt like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, just sort of laying down in the grass. And what am I doing? I'm bored. I'm staring at the tree. And I guess maybe that was really beneficial for me, hearing what you just said.
I was just thinking the other day, you know how sometimes you can like be taken back in time, like
Oh, yeah.
decades, and you get the exact same feeling you had that one day. It's amazing how our bodies hold on to that.
I think
But I
smell
remember,
does that really well.
right? It's
Yeah.
wild. I think for me, it was like an early spring night, and like it was like right before dawn, dusk. Sorry, dusk is nice. This is the mom brain kicking in. But I had this feeling of like when I was a child, I would just walk around the streets at home, and I envisioned that I was the queen of this animal kingdom, and
Oh, yeah.
only I could talk to the animals, and like I felt so important and powerful, and I loved going there, right? Like I would just walk around and being my own world, and I ultimately missed that feeling.
Mhm.
It's like it was me tapping into my imagination, and there is something so exciting about that, right? Like it's a gut feeling that you can't create elsewhere. So yeah, I think I'm gonna try to like play a little bit more and see like where can I go in my imagination now as I'm about to be 34. I don't know.
Ah, see, I am older than you. I mean, I was as a kid, I was Indiana Jones every day walking home from school, especially in the wintertime. I was imagining myself in like the North Pole navigating these big snowbanks to try to find my way back. So I I definitely relate to you there. And I think what you said about daydream and imagination, I mean, those things, I think you have to have that if we're going to be creating a better place and being positive and optimistic about that possibility, we have to be able to imagine it and dream it.
Yeah, I have a quote that completely changed my life. And Mary Oliver, I owe you forever. It just popped into my Instagram feed once, and it says, "Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable."
Mm.
And I literally, it stopped me in my tracks, and I had to read it again. Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable. And it like hit me like someone just darted me in my heart. I'm like, whoa, what am I blocking for myself because I need to know every answer, because I need to know what comes next. I need to have a vision for what tomorrow looks like. I need to have a plan for like, okay, in 5 years, I'll be here and whatnot. And it just cracked me wide open. And I can just say, like, when I read that quote, I was in my hometown back in Sweden, trying to get back with my ex boyfriend who clearly didn't want me anymore. And here I am in Massachusetts with my husband who's American and two kids, and I've lived in places like New York and San Francisco, and I now run my own company, and I do the things I always loved doing. And I could never, ever, ever have envisioned that for myself. Like that was such an unimaginable reality for my 20-year-old self. And I think anyone can look back 5 years ago and say, "Whoa, I could have never anticipated the path that I would go on or where I'd be today." Even if it's small changes, like even just how we've changed and how we view things differently and how we now maybe respond differently to an argument. We change all the time, and we actually don't know what a year from now will look like, or
Yeah.
10 years, or 20 years. And we tend to be afraid of the unimaginable, but what if we can be excited about the unimaginable? Right? Like that quote says, like keep some room in your heart for it.
Yeah.
And for me, it gets me excited because as a world, what if we did tap into our fullest potential? What if we did trust that, yeah, we can figure this out? We can create even better societies, better inventions, better worlds. And who I am in 10 years from now, or 20 or 30, I'm going to be healthier, happier, more grounded. We will have, created a much more wholesome way of living together, not just with each other, but with other species and in nature. And so when I think about that, it makes me really excited. And that's why I created the guided meditation, because I want people to reach that part of themselves of like, what if actually
Yeah.
something like this is possible? And I want to just say that maybe someone will not click and, do the meditation. I
I
hope
hope
so. But
so.
yeah, what comes through might just be a feeling. because we actually can't imagine the unimaginable, right? Like your brain cannot picture together, put together a picture of what you haven't seen yet. And so let it be a feeling, but like plant some trust in that feeling that, okay, this feels awesome, or this feels exciting, or this is a little bit curious, or whatever it might be, and just hold on to that and let that feeling drive you. Because we can unfold that future step by step if we continue to be guided by what if.
Yeah, there's that phrase "what if" I think is, well, it reminds me of the book by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, "What if we get it right?"
Hmm.
That's what you're saying, and I think there's something really important about, and I think about this with myself, in that I think I'm still a kid, and I think that allows me to have the ability to be okay imagining things that maybe are silly, or seemingly like people, your parents would tell you like, "Oh, that's ridiculous idea." But maybe it's really not a ridiculous idea. What you guys are doing is ridiculous, and we need to do something that changes all that so we can be in a livable planet here in our next couple decades.
And let's be ridiculous. Let's
It's
reframe
true.
that, you know? It's
Yeah.
fun to be ridiculous. That's how we
I
change the world.
I'm like that every day, and
There you go. You figured it out.
yeah. Well, you also talk about spiritualism, and I wanted to make sure we get to that because you briefly touched upon it a little earlier on, about its connection with climate activism, and I would just love for you to elaborate more on that.
Yeah, well, I can be in deep conversations with people about the practicalities of what needs to happen and what innovations we need to focus on and, how plausible is it that we will change this in the right time, yada, yada, yada. And then I feel like we always end up at the same spot, which is the how about spiritualism? Like, what role does that play? And how much actually needs to change within us for this to ever be, even possible? And I think a lot, actually, which is again why I think this inner development work is so important is because we need to allow ourselves to change. And excuse me for going back to the lessons from motherhood, but there's something so profound in giving birth to a child. And
Mhm.
there's science pointing to how like, you literally become a new person. Like there's more hormone changes, being pregnant and giving birth than your entire like adulthood. Like you just all of your teenage years. Like you actually change more in that moment than you do, when you go through
Oh,
puberty.
wow.
So that's pretty crazy. And I can reflect back just like 3 years ago before I had kids. I'm like, wow, I do not feel like the same person anymore. And I think hardship in any form does the same thing. Like it's not fun to go through them. But I don't think anyone will say, well, I wish I wasn't the person I am today because of what I learned, right? We always are proud of who we become. And it's always like, okay, that was a hard lesson to learn, but I'm grateful for who I became because of it. So I think there's a lot about spiritualism in our activism because I don't think a better world is possible unless we both trust that we can change and allow ourselves to go through that transformation and ultimately start to embrace and seek it. I think we have to really tap into it and let it happen faster. But a better world, again, I think is possible because we make it so. And it starts with changing ourselves. And that radical transformation
Mhm.
does start from within.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I'm a father, and so I can't imagine the I mean, I was pretty much, turned upside down when my daughter was born, so I would not know what it was like, to the exponential degree for being a mother.
Well, even men's hormones change, they now know.
Does
So,
it?
yes. So there's a truth to it for sure.
Yeah, I definitely felt, gosh, there was a weight on my shoulders. There was a lot of emotional things that have happened. And I think it's made me more emotional every year that she's been alive. She's now a teenager, so that
Mhm.
you have that to look forward to, and
I keep hearing that.
it's quite a different quite a different time. I wanted to ask a couple more things, and we try to make this show. We talked to I talked earlier about how I think your work has a practicality to it, and so that's a key theme that we carry through our show, and we wanted to ensure that people who listen, they can take something back with them and be actionable about it. So, what would you say are some actionable things we can do towards sustaining optimism in our lives? And I'm sure your book has plenty of examples.
Yeah. It's a handbook for a reason, and it's pretty thick.
Yeah, I have it right here. Here it is.
Beautiful.
It
I did, yeah, and it was a very heartfelt
it was.
signature. I practicality, I think I will start because every time people say, like, "What is one thing we can do?" And I kinda hate that question. You did not ask that question, but when people do, "What's the one thing?" I'm like, "Well, who are you? Where are you from? What are your passions?" Like, we can let's start there. But if I am to give an answer, it's slow down, right? Like, slow down to start to know yourself differently. There is something I focus very, prominently on in the book, but also in the work that I do, which is shifting the narrative on our stories. And there are some really crucial narrative shifts, and my favorite one is the one from minimizing ourselves to maximizing ourselves. Like, we shouldn't just continuously minimize our footprint because it's a very diminishing view of ourselves. Excuse me, and ultimately not very exciting way to show up in. Like, okay, how can I minimize myself today? How can I do less? Our brains are not wired to be excited
Yeah.
about that either, which is why there's this block for action. But instead, how can I really tap into my unique gifts? What is my passion? And Dr. Elizabeth Ayanna Johnson also talks about this, like finding your, like the climate action Venn diagram of like, what is your unique attribution to this movement? And I love that so much because we have to figure out like, what drives me? What gets me excited? What was I brought to this earth to do? And maybe for me, it was actually like recognizing that I love to write. For so long, I felt almost guilty and like, well, I'm not out there creating any solutions. I'm telling other people to figure out solutions, or I'm not out there, dedicating all my free hours cleaning out the local river. I show up when I can, but I love to write. And when I embrace that as my way of maximizing my footprint, now I feel calm and trusted in that. And that's when people reach out and say, the piece you just posted really, moved me and helped me see myself and my work differently. And so I know that there is, impact to be had there because I was able to figure out what does it look like to maximize my unique gift.
Mhm.
Not saying there are not better writers out there, but I find joy in it. And I think for me, that's why I say start by slowing down and having some really important conversations of like, okay, I care about this movement. I want to make an impact. I can't be everyone. I can't care about everything, right? I'm not going to be perfect. There will be times when I'm grabbing something packaged in plastic, or when I forget to compost my food, or when I will drive a gas guzzling car somewhere, or have to fly. Like there are actions that we just, since we're still existing in the old world, so to speak, we will continue to leave a negative footprint.
Yeah.
And so let's just accept that. Of course, try to minimize that impact as much as you can, but focus more attention on how can I maximize myself? Where can I matter? Where can I contribute? If that's a local movement or if that's at work, maybe you can, have something to say and maybe organize with your other coworkers. Maybe more people care about climate change than you think. And then there can be this extreme, transition from within a company that ultimately can make so much impact in the world around you. So I think the more we can harness what brings us joy and excitement and maximize our impact where it matters, that's a good place to start.
I'm glad that you said that because it reinforces something that I heard before. I was at a conference and there was a CEO of a beauty supply company, and he was, as a company, really trying to be as climate friendly as possible, but he was always failing at things, succeeding in others. And he said, you just got to give yourself a break. We're all here trying to live and we're having an impact. And sometimes it's bad and you just got to accept it and keep doing better. So I'm really
Mhm.
happy that you reinforced that for me because it really hit me when he said it.
And I think we shame ourselves so much, and then we don't learn about what other people are doing. And then we feel like there's nothing to join, right? We only see the bad news of what's happening that we don't want to see, and then we don't
Mhm.
hear the stories about amazing people out there doing their small parts. But if we start talking about it with, conviction and joy and excitement, we're like, oh, well, I can also do my part.
Yeah.
If my neighbor is composting, why shouldn't I compost, right? And so when we really, own with excitement the actions that we actually can take, and we, claim agency over the worlds that we can change, imagine the impact as those rings in the water spread. So yeah, 100%. Let's just kind of like dust off the shame and guilt and step into empowered action.
Well, I hit a new decade last month. And so, question for you is taking a nap in the afternoon a really good way of climate action?
You're asking a new mother. Would survive without no, I'm just kidding.
I need
Um,
permission to do this every day because it's so good.
I mean, ultimately, if it makes you feel good, then do it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
why are we
slowing down.
slow down and like listen to your body and trust that it's telling you something important. Same thing when it comes to like what foods to eat and when to eat it. Like,
Mm,
if you eat something and it doesn't make you feel good, then stop eating it, right? It's simple. It's not easy. Because we're addicted to things and we tend to do things
sugar.
that are not good for us. But I think if we can learn to really trust our bodies and listen to our needs and set the boundaries to say no more, even to the people that we love, right? Like there's a way to say no with love and respect,
Yeah.
respect towards ourselves. We can't be there for everyone. I was even sharing with my mom, who's visiting from Sweden right now. It's so sweet. But my 2-year-old daughter, I'm like, she's smarter than I think. And there are nights when she's like, I want my fourth story before bed. And I say, Eloise, I'm so tired. Mommy really needs to go to bed now. You can read this yourself in bed, but I'm not going to read you the story. And when I set that boundary with her, she gets it. She's like, okay, mom,
Yeah.
right? Like, or I can just continue to give in and feel frustrated and depleted and like, oh my gosh, my 2-year-old is so needy. No, of course, she's gonna keep asking if I keep giving. But if I set a boundary to say, that's it, I'm done now and I need to go to bed. And I think if we can learn to do that more with our coworkers, with ourselves, with family, we create those safety spaces where we can thrive in a whole different way. And it starts with being honest with ourselves. Like maybe I need a nap in the afternoon because I wake
Yeah.
up feeling so much more excited and
Agreed.
empowered or, productive. So do that. Yeah. There are
I
no
will.
rules.
I will every day.
Good.
Well, it seems like also you were very successful at setting boundaries in your life when you mentioned this toxic positivity earlier on in our conversation, where you said, "No, I'm not going to do this anymore because it's unrealistic and it's hurtful to your own wellness."
Yeah, it was awful. It was, like, we don't have to go down that you read my book and you'll learn about
Yeah.
it, but it's not working and it's not worth it. And ultimately, it's kind of dangerous for the movement because we give this false idea where we're headed. Again, it takes awareness hurts and that's okay. We have to also know about the bad news. We have to stay a little bit up to date, with what's happening. With that said, have a healthy relationship to bad news. Don't consume everything. And if you feel like, wow, this is becoming too much, it's too overwhelming, then take a break, right?
Mhm.
The world will continue to spin without you knowing everything that's going on.
2 seasons ago, I spoke with Sage Lanier, and she described her story about how she got involved in climate activism, and she was taking a class in climate science, and her professor was not coming out there and, just, "Let's do this, we can all do this, and it's, gonna be amazing." He was very authentic in his concern, and that authenticity, I think, really made how she said it, made her more interested in getting involved
Mm.
when it wasn't just like, "Yay, it's all gonna be fine." It was, "It may be fine, but we have to work for it." So, I have also been someone who had to eliminate this sort of toxic optimism from my life too, because yeah, it wasn't working for me.
And like to that point, kids get it, right? They just want to
Yeah.
feel seen and validated in their feelings. So if the teacher comes out and says, don't worry, we'll figure this out, it's like, well, the news tell me I should be worried. And so if you tell me you're worried too, then we can be in this together. And I feel much more safe in my feelings, right? So back to our earlier conversation about like accepting grief. I think if we can normalize, sharing that space and just because you're a person of authority doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers. I think, inviting uncertainty and ambiguity in our conversations and teaching kids to feel safe in that space. So like we don't know all the answers, but we can continue to show up and finding out what the answers could look like. They feel more safe in accepting that.
This is a great transition into my last question for you, because it's about education, and I'm curious about what crucial climate topics or engagement areas that you feel our youth should be learning about earlier on.
I think in all just regeneration in general because it brings a whole different narrative to our climate story, which is the one, again, that we shouldn't just minimize ourselves, but regeneration means stepping in and stepping up and doing more. Like, how can we work with nature? How can we restore? How can we bring back life where life has been taken? And I think it's ultimately a very optimistic storyline of, we can live in, you know, with nature. We can live with nature and we can bring back and we can be its partner in a way. So any sort of regeneration, if that's ocean restoration or regenerating the soil or, grow back forests or working with species, and they're all exciting stories. And I think then you can figure out, like, do I care more about the oceans? Or, I mean, not care more about, but like, where's my passion? But the water issue too, like, we don't talk enough about how vital water is for us and how it's a critical resource that we're losing more of. But yeah, I would say regeneration and just reframing the narrative of what else can be done if we step in and step up.
And I think I agree with you. And I think once you learn that, you'll learn about systems and how things are connected. And so if you do care about the oceans, maybe one way to help the oceans is to have healthy soil, because we learned in season 3 from a soil scientist that healthy soils equals healthy oceans.
Mm, I love that.
Well, Anne, it's been a wonderful almost hour with you today, and a big fan of your book, which is the Climate Optimist Handbook. Can you tell us more about where we can find you online and all the amazing projects that you have underway?
Yeah, so the best place to go is to my website, theclimateoptimist.com. I link my Substack newsletter. You can find the book. I have a course you can take if you want to. My podcast is coming back soon. I'm going to re-record or start recording
Good.
again soon. And yeah, you can also find my Instagram and LinkedIn link there as well.
And I think you have the guided meditation on there,
Yes, I do.
and yes, and one-on-one coaching, which I feel like I got some of that today. So thank you for
Again,
that.
I'll charge you later.
Yeah. Send the bill. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to your podcast coming back, because it's been a couple years, and it's about time. There's a lot more to talk about.
Oh, I can talk for hours, as you probably can tell.
Well, thank you,
Well,
Anne. It's been a great time.
thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. We want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Jackie Himmel, Bhavna Bhavani Shankar, and Adam Java. A big shout out to our new designer this season, Tyler Mayfield, and our social media strategist, Brianna Reggioni. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at The Climate Designers. You can find design prompts and more information on all of our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify, and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers.